The jungle was alive with sound that night, 1,000 voices rising from the shadows, strange cries of beasts and whispers of unseen wings. The human walked slowly, his boots sinking into the wet ground, his rifle heavy in his hands, his breath uneven. The crash of the transport still echoed in his ears. The fire and smoke behind him marked the place of death. But ahead was only darkness and the endless forest. He felt the eyes of hunters on him, waiting for him to stumble, waiting for him to fall. He pushed on, every step a fight against fear. The air smelled of rotten iron. The trees towered like walls of black stone. He listened hard, trying to hear the silence between the noises, because in that silence hid danger. Danger that moved without sound. Danger that killed without warning. He remembered the warnings from the others. This planet was not for men. It was for monsters. And the monsters here never forgave the weak. A rustle to his left made him freeze. His finger brushed the trigger. But it was not the tearing scream of a predator. It was a softer sound, a low cry, like a pup calling for its mother. He turned slowly, his eyes searching the brush. And then he saw them. Small shapes huddled in the shadows, eyes that glowed faint gold in the faint light. They stared at him without fear, their bodies sleek and scaled, claws sharp even at their young age. These were predator young, the most feared creatures on this world. The human's heart raced. He had been told stories of full-grown predators tearing armored men apart with one strike, of ships brought down by their swarms, of their endless hunts across the dark worlds. And yet here were their cubs, not attacking, not running, but moving toward him, one step, then another, until the largest cub pressed against his leg, its scales cool against his skin, its head tilted as if it knew him, as if it trusted him. He did not move. Sweat ran down his face. His body begged him to run, but he knew to run was to die. Instead he stayed still, his hand lowering the rifle inch by inch, his eyes locked on theirs. And in that moment he felt something he could not name. Not fear, not hate, but a bond that grew stronger with every second. The cubs circled him, sniffing, growling low, yet not with hunger, more like guardians standing watch, protecting him from what he could not see. The night air grew colder, and the jungle grew quiet, too quiet. He felt the hair rise on his neck. Something bigger was coming. The cubs sensed it too. Their growls grew sharper. Their eyes flicked to the dark trees. The human held his breath, waiting, listening. The ground seemed to tremble under some heavy step. A branch cracked. A roar like thunder rolled through the forest, and then the trees parted. From the black came a shape vast and terrible, taller than the human, armored with blades of bone, eyes glowing like fire in the night. The predator mother had returned. Her roar split the silence, shaking the leaves, shaking his very bones. Her teeth like spears glistened in the dim light. Her body moved with the grace of death itself. She saw him. She saw her young pressed to his side, and her step slowed. The human could not breathe. His legs felt weak, his rifle useless in his hands. He knew this was the end. No man survived the stare of a predator mother. Her eyes burned into him. Her chest rose and fell with each thunderous breath. The cubs snarled and stepped between him and her, their small bodies trembling yet unyielding. They stood against their own blood, against the one who gave them life. They stood for him. The mother tilted her head, her claws dug into the dirt. Her eyes flicked from the cubs to the human and back again. Silence stretched. The jungle held its breath. He felt time slow. He thought of home, of friends long gone, of the moment of death. But the strike did not come. Instead, the predator mother lowered her head. Her eyes locked on him with something strange, something that was not rage, not hunger, but recognition. Then, without another sound, she turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving him with her young, leaving him with questions that had no answer. The human's hands shook. The cubs pressed close against him, their golden eyes watching the trees, their growls low and steady. He realized they had chosen him, and he could not understand why. In that moment, the jungle no longer felt the same. He was not just prey anymore. He was something else, something tied to these beasts. And as the night deepened, he knew the danger was only beginning, because the bond between him and the predator young had been made, and nothing in the galaxy could break it. The night pressed heavy upon the jungle. each tree towering like a black wall, each shadow holding secrets that men feared to name. The human stood among the cubs with his rifle lowered, his breath shallow, the memory of the mother's roar still shaking through his bones. He did not move. He could not move, for the eyes of the young still glowed bright beside him, their small bodies pressed close, as if he was their shield. Yet he knew deep in his heart that he was nothing compared to the force that had appeared before them. The mother predator had not struck, her claws had not ripped, her teeth had not torn. She had lowered her head and vanished back into the darkness. Yet that mercy was no mercy at all. It was a sign, a choice made in silence, one that the human did not yet understand. The cubs had chosen him, and in that choice they had bound him to something greater than his own survival, something that would change him, and perhaps the fate of all who walked beneath these stars. The jungle grew restless, as if aware of what had taken place. Branches creaked in the wind. Unseen wings cut the air. The ground seemed to whisper with the crawl of lesser creatures, and through it all the human felt watched, not by the cubs, not even by the hidden mother, but by the world itself, a world that tested every step and punished every mistake. He held his weapon tighter, though he knew it was only a stick against the storms to come. Yet still he walked, the cubs following as though bound by an invisible chain. He remembered the words of his captain before the crash, words spoken in warning, that predators were not just beasts, that they were symbols of this death world's will, that to see one was to stand before the spirit of the planet itself. And now he had stood not only before one, but before her young, and instead of killing him they had accepted him. The thought burned in his mind as he moved, his boots sinking into mud, the jungle sounds rising again, the cubs growling low whenever danger brushed too near. Hours stretched into timeless dark. The moon above was hidden by clouds. The air grew heavy with mist. His lungs fought to draw breath. And yet he pressed on. Every step a prayer to live. Every sound a reminder of how close death lingered. Then the cubs froze, their ears twitching, their bodies low, their eyes fixed on the trees ahead. The human froze too, his finger brushing the trigger. And from the black came the sound that made his heart falter, a roar not of one beast, but of many rolling. Thunder across the jungle floor. Shapes emerged, not the mother but hunters, tall figures with masks that gleamed faint blue, weapons alive with crackling light, their armor painted with marks of old hunts, their voices low growls as they spoke in tongues the human could not know. They moved with purpose, scanning the ground, seeking signs of prey. And when their eyes fell upon him, they did not fire. They did not speak. They only raised their heads as if sniffing the air. And then they saw the cubs. The hunters stiffened. Their weapons hummed with power. One pointed directly at the largest cub that stood near the human's leg. The human shouted, though no word came clear. Only a broken cry that stopped the hunter for a heartbeat. The cubs hissed and growled, standing in a circle around the man, their teeth bared, their claws ready. And the hunters did not understand. They saw only a human and predator young standing side by side, a sight that should never be, a sight that burned against the laws of their world. Tension rose like fire. The human's hand trembled as he aimed his rifle, though he knew it was nothing against their weapons. The cubs leaned against him as though waiting for his command. The hunters tightened their formation. The jungle itself held its breath again. And then, before blood could spill, another roar shattered the balance, a roar greater than all before. It came from behind, from above, from the depths of the earth itself. The trees bent as the sound struck, and the hunters turned. In fear, the mother predator returned, her eyes burning brighter than fire, her body larger than he remembered, her claws dripping with earth. She moved with fury, yet her fury was not aimed at him. It was aimed at the hunters. She charged, the ground quaking under each strike of her limbs. The hunters fired, blue light flashing, but her armor of bone and scale turned much aside. She tore through them like storm-tearing branches, one scream, then another, then silence broken only by her roar of triumph. The hunters scattered, fleeing into the black. The cubs cried out, their voices sharp with joy. They ran to her, circling her massive form. Yet she turned her gaze again to the human, her breath steaming in the night, her teeth glistening wet. She lowered her head once more, closer now. So close he felt the heat of her breath against his skin. He trembled but did not run. He met her gaze with shaking resolve, and in that gaze was no hunger, no rage, only judgment. And after a long moment, she turned her head aside as though granting him passage. The human fell to his knees, his body heavy with fear and wonder. The cubs returned to his side, pressing against him, refusing to leave, and the mother watched, her eyes softer than before. Then she vanished again into the endless jungle, her steps fading like thunder rolling away. Yet the echo of her presence remained, not only in the air but in his chest, in the bond that now tied him to her young, in the knowledge that she had allowed it, that she had chosen not to end him, but to let him walk. The night stretched on, and the human rose again, his strength nearly broken, his mind lost in questions. Why him? Why did the cubs cling to him? Why did the mother show mercy? Each question a storm with no answer. Yet deep within he felt the weight of destiny, something greater than chance, something that would call him forward whether he wished or not. The cubs whined softly as they followed, their eyes bright in the mist, their trust unshaken, and the man walked on into the unknown, carrying the bond of predators upon his shoulders. He knew the survivors of his ship would not believe him if they saw this. He knew the galaxy itself would laugh if told that Predator Young had chosen a human, and yet it was truth. It was now his life. And as the mist curled thicker, and as the jungle whispered once more, he understood that the true danger had only begun. For if predators had chosen him, then others would come to test him, and the jungle would not forgive weakness, nor would the hunters who had fled, nor would the stars that watched from above. And so the man walked on, the cubs at his side, the night alive with unseen eyes, his heart heavy with fear and hope, the path ahead uncertain, yet one truth clear. He was no longer prey. He was something more, something born in the shadow of predators, something that even the mother had not denied, and the world itself seemed to bow in silence before that truth. The dawn came slow across the jungle, pale light seeping through the endless canopy, mist curling like ghostly rivers over roots and stone. The human stood stiff among the cubs, his eyes hollow from a night without rest. He had walked with them through the black hours, always waiting for the strike that never came, always listening for the mother's roar that lingered only in memory. His heart beat heavy, each throb telling him that he carried a weight he did not ask for, yet could not escape. The cubs moved around him with restless energy, their growls soft, their claws scratching earth as they circled and sniffed. They guarded him even as they played, their tails flicking, their eyes never straying too far from his shape. He felt them watching, measuring his every step, as though they expected him to lead. Though he was no leader, just a soldier broken by fire and crash, a man lost in a world of death. But to them he was something else, something chosen, and he could not understand why. Through the mist voices rose, not the growl of beasts but the harsh cry of men. The human froze, his eyes narrowing, and from the brush came survivors, a dozen or more, faces he knew, armor torn, weapons gripped with desperate hands. They had lived through the wreck as he had, and now they stood with wide eyes, staring not at him, but at the cubs at his side, fear and anger twisting their faces as their weapons lifted in trembling aim. The leader of the survivors, a scarred officer with voice like broken stone, barked a command to fire, yet no shot came, for hesitation gripped them all. To fire upon Predator Young was to invite death, but to leave them alive was madness. They demanded answers from the human, why he stood among them, why they did not tear him apart, why they circled him as though he was their pack, their brother, their protector, their master. The human tried to speak, but words were drowned by growls as the cubs pushed closer, their small bodies standing between him and his own kind. The officer raised his weapon higher, his finger ready, his voice sharp with rage, calling the man traitor, calling him cursed, warning that predators could never be trusted, that to keep them near was death for all. But before the human could answer, the largest cub stepped forward, teeth bared, eyes blazing with golden fire. A sound rose from its throat, not just a growl but something older, deeper, a challenge that filled the air with primal weight, and the survivors fell back in shock, their courage trembling. The human lifted his hand, not in command but in plea, asking both sides to stop, to wait, to see. But his voice shook with weakness, his words lost in the rising storm of fear. The survivors whispered of killing the cubs before they grew strong, of ending the human before he betrayed them further, their fear rising with each heartbeat. And the cubs pressed tighter against him, snarling louder, their bond clear to see, a bond that could not be broken without blood. The officer roared and pulled the trigger. A flash of fire burst. A scream split the air. One cub cried out, blood staining the soil, its body shaking with pain. The others shrieked, their fury exploding, and the human fell to his knees beside the wounded young, his hands pressing against the wound, his eyes burning with tears he had not shed since boyhood. The cub looked at him with eyes wide not with hate, but with trust, with a plea for him to hold on, to protect, to save. And he felt something break inside him, something that would never mend. The jungle itself seemed to react. The air grew heavy. The earth shuddered with low tremors. Distant roars echoed from unseen throats. Predators called to one another in voices that shook the trees. The survivors felt the weight of doom pressing upon them, their faces pale with dread, for they had done what should never be done. They had spilled the blood of predator young, and now the forest itself seemed to rise against them. The human rose, blood on his hands, rage in his chest, his rifle shaking in his grip. His voice broke into a cry that silenced even the cubs. He warned the survivors to lower their weapons, to leave, to run before the storm came. But the officer laughed, a bitter laugh that hid fear. He spat words of scorn, declaring the man already lost, already doomed, claiming no bond with beasts could save him, claiming that only steel and fire could rule a death world. But even as he spoke, the jungle answered. A roar unlike any before split the sky. Deeper, darker. The voice of the mother, her fury rolling across the canopy. Branches cracked. Leaves rained down. Shapes moved in the mist. Not one predator, but many. Drawn by the cry of wounded young, by the scent of spilled blood. Their eyes flared like stars through the fog. The survivors raised weapons with shaking hands. But their courage broke, for they knew what came. They knew none would live if the pack struck. The cubs gathered around the human, pressing close, growling toward the trees, their trust unbroken even in pain, their loyalty greater than fear. And the man felt the truth burn in his heart. He had been given a choice, to side with his kind who called him cursed, who drew blood without thought, or to side with the cubs who had chosen him, who had trusted him, who now looked to him for strength. And in that moment he knew there was no turning back. The officer shouted for fire, but his words fell empty, for the men no longer believed. They saw the forest alive with hunters. They saw the predators closing in, and their hearts broke under the weight of that vision. Some fled into the dark, screaming as the jungle swallowed them. Some fell to their knees in despair. Only the officer stood tall, his eyes wild, his rage blind. He aimed again at the cubs, his finger tight, but before he could fire the human moved. With a cry torn from his soul, the human struck him down, rifle clashing against armor, fist striking with desperate fury. The officer fell into mud, stunned, beaten. The man stood over him with chest heaving, his voice shaking as he declared his choice. He would stand with the predators. He would protect the young. He would carry the bond they had given him, no matter the cost, no matter the doom that followed. The cubs cried out in triumph, pressing against him, their eyes blazing with light, and the forest itself seemed to answer with a chorus of roars. The survivors scattered, fleeing into the endless dark, their screams fading, their courage shattered. Only the man remained, bloodied, broken, yet standing, the cubs at his side, the wounded one leaning against him with trust unbroken, and the jungle bowed in silence, as though watching, as though waiting, for the path he had chosen was no longer his alone. It was the path of predators and man bound as one, and the galaxy itself would tremble when it learned what choice had been made that day. The night sky burned red with fire as ships cut through the clouds, their engines roaring like storms, their lights stabbing the darkness. The human stood in the clearing with the predator young pressed against him, his hands still stained with blood, his heart heavy from the choice he had made. The air shook with thunder as the hunters descended, their ships breaking the silence with screams of metal. The jungle shivered at their coming as though it knew that war had arrived. The cubs growled, low, their small bodies tense, their eyes locked on the sky, as if they too understood that this night would not end without death. The human's breath came sharp, each gasp a battle to stay calm. The survivors who had fled into the trees would not get far. He knew it. The hunters would sweep the forest and burn all in their path. He looked down at the cubs who pressed close, their scales shining faint in the glow of fire above, their trust unbroken, their loyalty unshaken. He whispered to them, though his voice cracked, promising that he would not leave them, that he would fight even if the stars themselves fell upon him. They tilted their heads as if they understood, and their growls turned into cries of unity, cries that carried into the dark. The ships landed with a crash of steel against soil. The ground shook with tremors, dust rising like smoke. From the open hatches came the hunters, tall and armored, their masks glowing with blue fire, their weapons alive with humming power. They moved in tight ranks, scanning the ground, marking the broken branches, reading the signs of passage. And then their leader raised a clawed hand, his voice booming in command. He spoke words that carried meaning even through unknown tongue. He called for the prey to be found, for the predators to be slain, for the world itself to bow beneath their hunt. The cubs hissed, their bodies low to the earth, their tails whipping back and forth. The human raised his rifle, though he knew it was weak, his fingers shaking yet steady with will, his eyes locked on the advancing figures. He could feel the tension of the forest itself, every leaf trembling, every root ready to break. The hunters spread wide, their light cutting through the mist, their senses sharp. They were not afraid. They were hunters of predators, killers trained through endless battles. And now they came for the young, and for the man who walked among them. The human moved slowly back into the shadows of the trees. The cubs followed close, their eyes gleaming like fireflies. He pressed his back against the bark and tried to steady his breathing. His mind raced with plans, each more hopeless than the last. Yet still he thought. Still he tried, because the cubs looked at him with trust, and he could not betray that. He could not throw them to death and walk away, for in that choice his own soul would die. And so he readied himself to fight, even if his fight was nothing but a spark against the storm. The hunters unleashed their beasts. Cages fell open with metallic clangs. From them poured creatures built in dark labs, twisted bodies with claws of metal and flesh, eyes glowing with hunger, jaws that snapped with machine precision. They were made to kill predators, to tear them apart without fear. They spread through the jungle in silence, sniffing the ground, growling low. The cubs stiffened, their cries rising, their fear sharp in the air. The human clenched his rifle and stepped forward, no longer hiding, no longer waiting. He would not let the cubs be taken without a fight. The first beast lunged from the shadows, its jaws wide, its body gleaming with wet steel. The human fired, the blast echoing through the trees, sparks flying as the bullet tore into its hide. The beast shrieked, stumbling but not falling. The cubs pounced, their teeth sinking into exposed joints, their claws raking the machine flesh. The creature screamed and thrashed, but together they dragged it down, their growls wild, their fury burning. The human gasped for air and reloaded, sweat running down his face. The battle had begun. More beasts came, their eyes bright, their steps heavy. The jungle filled with roars and screams. The human fought, his rifle blazing, his arms aching, his ears ringing. The cubs leapt with courage far beyond their small bodies, striking, clawing, never yielding. Each strike of their claws echoed with the bond they carried. Each cry of theirs was answered by his. Man and predator young fighting as one. The hunters watched from the edges, their masks glowing, their voices murmuring in surprise. For they had never seen this, never seen beasts and man stand side by side against the storm. The ground ran slick with oil and blood, the air filled with smoke and cries. The human staggered, his body bruised, his rifle nearly empty. Yet he stood tall. The cubs pressed close, their eyes still bright, their loyalty still unbroken. He looked at them and knew they would fight until their last breath. And so would he, no matter the cost, no matter the doom that came from the sky. The hunters grew restless. Their leader raised his weapon and gave command. They would strike. They would end both man and cubs together. Their ranks moved forward, weapons humming brighter. The human braced himself, his body weak, his spirit burning. The cubs growled with fury, their tails lashing. The jungle itself seemed to cry out as the hunters advanced, And then the earth shook once more, with a roar so vast it split the night sky. The roar came from the distance, deeper than before, the cry of not one but many, full-grown predators moving through the jungle, their voices a storm of vengeance. The hunters paused, their courage faltering, their eyes flicking to the trees, and the human felt hope spark in his chest though faint. The cubs raised their heads and cried in answer, their voices small yet proud, the bond between them echoing into the air, calling their kin. The hunters tightened ranks, fear mixing with fury. They had come prepared to face predators, but not this, not man and cubs and pack together. Their leaders shouted orders, demanding they press on, that they kill before the full storm arrived. The human raised his rifle once more though nearly spent, his body trembling with exhaustion. Yet his voice rose in a cry that carried through the jungle, a cry that joined with the roars of the cubs, a cry that declared defiance against the hunters, against the beasts they had unleashed, against the doom they carried in their ships. The jungle exploded with movement as shapes vast and terrible rushed through the trees. The full predators had arrived, their eyes burning, their bodies tearing earth with every stride. The hunters turned their weapons to meet them, the air filled with light and thunder. The battle surged into chaos. The human stood at the center, the cubs at his side, the ground quaking, the air burning, and in that storm he understood that this was no longer survival, no longer chance. This was war, a war that had found him, a war he had not chosen yet could not refuse, and the bond between him and the predators would decide who lived and who fell beneath the stars. The battle raged like fire across the jungle, the night alive with roars and screams. The hunters clashed with predators under the burning sky. Weapons blazed with blue light, claws and teeth struck with fury. The ground shook as giants fought in the shadows, and at the heart of the chaos stood the human, his rifle nearly empty, his body trembling, yet his will unbroken. The cubs pressed against him, their eyes bright with fire, their voices fierce as they cried to the pack, the bond between them glowing like flame in the darkness. He moved through smoke and ash, his breath sharp, his heart pounding. The hunters aimed at him, their voices spitting curses in their strange tongue, but the cubs leapt before him, their claws raking, their teeth sinking deep. The hunters stumbled back, stunned by the sight, for never had they seen predator young fight for anything but themselves. Never had they seen them guard a man as though he was kin. Their masks flashed with confusion. Their weapons wavered, and in that moment the human struck. His rifle spat fire. One hunter fell into mud, his armor cracked. The cubs snarled in triumph. But the victory was small, for more hunters pressed forward, their machines roaring, their beasts shrieking, their numbers endless. The human staggered, sweat dripping from his brow. His rifle clattered empty. He reached for his blade, its edge dull but still alive with purpose. He raised it high. His voice broke into a cry of defiance, a cry that carried through smoke and blood. The cubs answered, their cries sharp, their eyes fierce, and together they stood in a circle, back to back, man and predator young against the storm. The hunters surged, their weapons flashing. The human swung his blade, steel clashing with steel, sparks dancing, his arms heavy yet steady, his eyes burning with rage. A beast lunged, jaws wide. The cubs leapt, their claws tearing its throat, oil and blood spilling on the soil. The man gasped for breath, his chest heaving, yet he smiled through pain, for in their eyes he saw loyalty, loyalty stronger than fear, stronger than death, and he knew then that he was no longer alone, that his fight was not his fight alone. The jungle echoed with roars. The full-grown predators struck from the trees, their claws tearing hunters apart, their cries shaking the air. Yet the hunters held their ground, their discipline sharp, their formation strong. They fired in lines, their beasts swarming, their courage unbroken. The battle was a storm without end, and the human and cubs stood at its center, small against giants, fragile against fire. Yet their bond turned fragility into strength, their courage into fire there, defiance into thunder. The wounded cub staggered, its side torn from the earlier shot, its legs weak, yet it refused to fall. It pressed against the man, its eyes glowing with trust. The human knelt and pressed his hand to its wound, his blood mixing with its blood, his voice whispering words of strength. promising that it would not die, promising that he would not let it go. The cub licked his hand weakly, and with a sudden growl it rose again, stumbling but still standing, still ready to fight, and the man felt his heart burn with pride. The hunters saw weakness and pressed harder. Their leader raised his weapon high, his voice booming across the field, calling for the end, calling for the prey to be slain. His mask glowed brighter, his steps thundered, and he aimed straight at the man. The cubs leapt to shield him, but the human roared, his blade rising, his voice tearing through the storm. He charged, his body broken but his will burning. He struck the hunter leader, steel against armor, sparks bursting, their struggle fierce, their cries shaking the air. The cubs lunged too, their claws raking, their teeth tearing, and together they brought the leader to his knees. The hunters faltered, their courage shaken, for never had they seen such unity. Never had they seen predator young and man fight as one. Their formation cracked, their lines broke, and the predators surged, their roars filling the night, their fury unstoppable. The hunters were driven back, their beasts falling under tooth and claw, their voices turning from war cries to screams. The jungle itself seemed to rise against them, branches cracking, roots tearing, the earth trembling with rage. The human staggered, blood running down his arms, his chest heaving, his vision blurred, yet he stood, his blade red, his eyes locked on the cubs who pressed close, their bodies trembling yet unyielding, their loyalty burning, their bond unbroken, and he realized that they had chosen him not by mistake, not by chance, but by instinct, by truth deeper than words, truth that no man had ever known, truth that bound him not only to them but to their kind, to the predators themselves. The battle raged still, yet its tide had turned. The hunters who had come with pride now stumbled in fear. Their ships shook as predators struck their hulls. Their weapons cracked under endless assault. Their leader fallen, their courage shattered. The human raised his blade high, his voice breaking into a cry that echoed across the field. The cubs cried too, their voices sharp and wild, their bond blazing into the air, and the predators answered, their roars uniting into one great thunder, a sound that drowned the hunters, a sound that shook the stars. The hunters fled, their ranks broken, their ships rising with fire and smoke. The jungle howled with triumph as predators chased them, tearing into stragglers, dragging them down. The human collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving, his arms shaking. The cubs pressed against him, licking his wounds, whining softly, their eyes bright with trust, their bodies warm against his, and he wrapped his arms around them, his tears falling into their scales, his voice whispering thanks, thanks for their loyalty, thanks for their courage, thanks for their bond that had saved him, that had made him more than man. The night grew quiet at last, the fires fading, the roars turning to silence, the jungle breathing slow again. Predators moved through the shadows, their eyes glowing, their bodies tall and fierce, yet none struck him, none touched the cubs. They only looked, their gazes heavy with meaning, with judgment, with respect, for they saw what had been forged. They saw the man who fought as one of them. They saw the bond of blood and loyalty, and they did not strike. They only bowed their heads as they passed into the shadows once more. The human held the cubs close, his body broken, his heart burning. He knew the war was not ended. He knew the hunters would return, stronger, angrier. He knew the galaxy itself would not ignore what had happened here. That word would spread of the man who fought beside predator young, the man chosen by beasts, the man whose bond shook hunters and called packs to war. He felt fear, yes, but also strength, for he was not alone. He would never be alone again, and in the glow of their golden eyes, he saw his path, his fate, his legacy. The night passed, dawn broke, the jungle bathed in light. Smoke rose from the ruins of ships, bodies lay in silence. The cubs stirred awake, their eyes blinking at the sun, their voices soft as they pressed against him. And he rose, weak but unyielding, his blade strapped at his side, his hand resting on the heads of the cubs, and he walked forward into the light, into a future unknown, into battles yet to come, with predators at his side and loyalty burning in his heart, loyalty stronger than fear, stronger than death, loyalty that bound man. The smoke had not yet cleared from the battlefield when the jungle began to stir again. The ground trembled with low rumbles, the air heavy with the scent of blood and fire. The human stood tall though his body was broken, his arms cut and bruised, his blade dulled and cracked. The cubs pressed close against his legs, their eyes glowing with fierce light, their bodies weary yet unyielding. They had fought through storm and fire, and they still stood, their loyalty burning brighter than any flame. He knew the hunters were not finished. He knew the fight was not yet won. The ships had fled, but they would return, vengeance in their hearts, rage in their hands. They would come not only for him, but for the cubs, for the predators, for the bond that defied all order. He could feel the weight of that truth pressing on him, heavy as stone, sharp as blade, yet he did not break beneath it. He only stood straighter, his hands resting on the cubs, as though drawing strength from their warmth. The predators of the jungle watched from the shadows, full-grown giants with eyes that burned like suns, their claws dripping with blood, their bodies scarred from countless battles. They had answered the cry of the cubs. They had seen the man fight at their side, and they had allowed him to live. Yet their silence was heavy with judgment, as though they waited, as though they tested his worth. The human felt their gaze pierce him, not as prey, but as something more, something unproven, something that could rise or fall, depending on the path he chose. And then the sound came, a roar not of predator, but of machines. The sky burned red again as hunters returned, larger ships this time, their weapons glowing brighter, their engines roaring like storms. They came with fury, with fire, with endless hate. The jungle shook with their descent, the ground splitting under the force of their landing. The human's heart pounded. The cubs hissed and snarled, their small bodies pressing closer. The predators lifted their heads, their roars echoing across the canopy. The world itself braced for the storm to come. From the ships poured hunters in ranks, their armor gleaming, their weapons alive with humming death, their voices sharp as they barked orders. Their leader walked tall, scarred and terrible, his mask glowing brighter than the rest. He carried a weapon vast and heavy, forged to kill predators with one strike. He raised it high, his voice booming through the battlefield. He demanded surrender. He demanded the cubs. He demanded the man to kneel and give them up or die with them. His words rolled like thunder, his threat sharp as blade. The jungle fell into silence. Even the wind stilled. Even the birds ceased. The human stood with blade in hand, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on the hunters. The cubs whimpered softly, yet did not move away, their loyalty unbroken, their trust deep. He looked at them, then at the predators who waited in the trees, their eyes glowing, their bodies still, and he felt the choice burn inside him, a choice that would define him, a choice that would bind him forever. He lifted his blade higher, his voice rising in answer, a single cry that echoed into the silence. He would not surrender. He would not kneel. He would stand. The hunters roared with laughter. Their leader sneered, his mask glowing brighter. He gave the signal. Their weapons flared alive. The ground shook as they marched forward, their beasts released from cages, creatures of machine and flesh snarling, jaws snapping, claws gleaming, the air filled with smoke and thunder. The battle began again, fiercer than before, darker than before. The human charged forward, the cubs at his side, their roars sharp, their teeth bared. The predators leapt from the trees, their bodies slamming into the hunters. The night shook with chaos. The man fought with fury, his blade clashing against steel, sparks bursting with each strike. His arms ached, his legs burned, yet his spirit blazed brighter. He was no longer a soldier broken, no longer prey lost in the jungle. He was chosen. He was bound. He was predator and man together. The cubs leapt beside him, their claws striking, their voices sharp, their eyes fierce. Together they fought as one, their bond unbroken even as fire rained from the sky. The hunters pressed hard, their ranks endless, their weapons deadly. Yet the predators did not falter. They struck again and again, their roars drowning the thunder, their claws tearing armor, their fury unstoppable. The human fought at their center, his blade flashing, his cry fierce, his heart alive with loyalty. Every strike he made was for the cubs. Every breath he drew was for their bond. Every wound he bore was proof of their choice, proof of the path he had taken. The hunter leader came forward, his weapon glowing with power. each step shaking the ground. His eyes locked on the man, his voice calling him traitor, cursed, doomed. He raised his weapon high, ready to strike. The man stood tall though broken, his blade raised though dull. The cubs pressed close, their growls fierce, their loyalty burning. The predators roared in answer, the air trembling with the sound. The two forces clashed, weapon against blade, roar against roar. The jungle itself shook under their fury. The battle raged on. The human fought with every drop of strength, his arms heavy, his chest torn. Yet he stood. The cubs leapt, striking the leader, their claws scratching his armor, their teeth tearing at his weapon. He swung in rage, striking the ground, sparks flying. The man lunged, his blade piercing the cracks. The leader roared in fury, staggering. The predators surged forward, their roars echoing. The hunters faltered, their courage breaking, their lines cracking. Yet still they fought. Still they pressed, unwilling to fall. The man cried out, his voice breaking the storm, a cry of defiance, a cry of loyalty, a cry that bound predator and man. His words rolled like thunder, his blade flashed like fire. The cubs cried in answer, their voices sharp, their eyes blazing. The predators roared as one, their fury unstoppable. The hunters fell back, their ranks breaking, their screams filling the air. The leader roared again, raising his weapon for one final strike. But the man did not yield. He stood firm, his blade ready, his eyes locked, his bond unbroken. The jungle roared with him, the predators surged, the cubs leapt. The battle reached its peak, the air alive with chaos, the ground shaking with fury, and the world seemed to hold its breath, watching, waiting, for the outcome of this stand, for the fate of man and predator together. And in that storm, the man knew. The choice was made. There was no return. He had chosen to stand, to fight, to live and die with the cubs at his side, with predators as his kin, with loyalty as his fire. And the galaxy itself would tremble when the story was told, the story of the man who stood, the man who fought, the man who would not surrender. The night had ended, but the battle still echoed through the trees. Smoke curled upward like black rivers, the ground littered with broken weapons and shattered armor. The cries of dying hunters fading into silence. The predators stood tall among the ruins, their eyes glowing, their claws dripping with the proof of victory. At the center of it all stood the human, his chest heaving, his blade cracked and red. The cubs pressed against him, their small bodies trembling yet alive, their eyes fixed on him with unshaken trust, their loyalty shining brighter than the fires that burned the sky. The hunters who had survived fled into the shadows, their voices sharp with rage, their ships lifting into the clouds with trails of smoke. They would not forget what had happened. They would not forgive. They would return with greater fire, with endless armies. The human knew this. He felt it deep in his bones, yet his spirit did not break. He had stood. He had fought. He had chosen, and that choice now burned into the hearts of all who had seen it, predator and man alike. The predators gathered around him, full-grown giants whose roars had shaken the stars. They circled him and the cubs, their eyes burning with something beyond fury, something older, deeper, their silence heavier than thunder. The human felt their gaze pierce him, not with hunger, not with hate, but with judgment, with acceptance, with respect. The mother predator stepped forward, her body vast and terrible, her eyes glowing like suns. She lowered her head slowly, her breath washing over him hot and sharp, and the jungle itself seemed to bow in that moment. The cubs cried out in triumph, pressing against him as though declaring him one of their own. The man knelt, his body heavy with wounds, his arms wrapping around the cubs, his voice breaking with tears. He whispered words of thanks though none could understand. The mother's eyes softened, her claws digging into soil, her head lowering closer, and for a breath the man thought she would strike. But she did not. She only touched her brow to the earth before him, a gesture unthinkable for a predator, a gesture that would echo through legend. The pack roared in unison, their voices rising, like storm, their cries carrying across the canopy, announcing to the world that something new had been born. The human rose again, weak but unyielding, his blade strapped to his side. The cubs followed step by step, their eyes bright, their loyalty unbroken. He looked to the horizon where the sun now rose, casting light upon the wounded world. He knew the days ahead would not be easy. He knew the hunters would return. He knew the galaxy would not believe until it saw. But he also knew the truth, that he was no longer just a man, no longer just a soldier broken by fire. He was the bond itself, the bridge between predator and human, a bond sealed in blood and loyalty, unbroken even by war. The survivors of his ship, those few who had fled into the night, crept from the shadows, their faces pale with fear and awe. They saw the predators standing around him. They saw the cubs pressed against his side. They saw the mother bow her head to him, and their hearts broke under the weight of that sight. Some fell to their knees in silence. Some wept. Some turned and fled once more, unable to bear the truth. But all of them knew they had witnessed the impossible. They had seen a man chosen by predators, and no lie could ever erase that. The human looked at them with weary eyes, his voice soft yet sharp as he spoke. He told them to carry the story, to tell the galaxy what they had seen, to speak of the bond that had been born, not to spread fear but to spread truth. The survivors nodded, some in trembling fear, some in silent awe, and they turned to vanish into the jungle, their voices already whispering the tale that would spread like wildfire across stars. The predators moved back into the shadows, their eyes glowing from the trees, their bodies silent yet watchful. Only the cubs remained close, pressing against the man, their loyalty unshaken, their trust unbroken. He knew they would never leave him. He knew wherever he went they would follow. He placed his hand upon their heads, feeling the warmth of their scales, and he whispered to them, promising that he would protect them as they had protected him, promising that their bond would never break, promising that whatever came he would face it with them. The jungle seemed to breathe in answer, the wind stirring leaves, the earth trembling faint beneath his feet, as though the world itself had accepted his vow. The human lifted his gaze to the sky, where smoke still hung, where stars still glimmered faint beyond the burning clouds. He felt the weight of destiny upon him, heavy as the mountain, sharp as the blade, yet he did not bend beneath it. He only stood taller, for he was no longer prey, no longer soldier lost. He was chosen. He was bound. He was predator and man together. As the sun rose higher, the cubs walked with him out of the clearing, their voices soft, their eyes bright, each step carrying them further into the unknown, yet each step uniting them deeper. The jungle watched in silence. Predators watched from the shadows, the story already alive, already carried in whispers, already burning into legend, the tale of the man who stood, the man who fought, the man who was chosen by predator young, the man whose bond shook hunters, the man whose legacy would echo across stars. The galaxy would hear of it soon. Ships would carry the whispers, traders would tell the tale in markets, soldiers would murmur it in barracks, hunters would rage against it, predators would roar in pride, worlds would tremble, rulers would fear, and still the man would walk forward, the cubs at his side, his blade in his hand, his heart burning with loyalty, his soul unbroken, his fate unshaken, the legacy already alive, unyielding, unstoppable. And when the hunters returned, as they surely would, with fire and armies, with ships that blotted out the sky, with rage that burned brighter than suns, they would not face just a man. They would not face just predator young. They would face a bond unbreakable, a bond that turned prey into predator, a bond that turned weakness into thunder, a bond that no fire could burn, no blade could cut, no hate could break. And in that bond the man knew his legacy, a legacy written not in words, not in stone, but in blood and loyalty, in the roar of predators and the cry of man as one.